Hey, Wings, how are you? Gotcha, sneaking in here. Oh, tiny bit. Yeah, yeah. Good. Take some of ours, cause Jesus Christmas, we don't need more. We don't need more freaking. Did you miss much? Not a thing. I actually just hopped on. I was a couple of minutes late getting in tonight because the TikTok Live Studio software decided it needed to update. I am doing all right. Hey, Lynn, how are you? Deborah, welcome in. Hey, Jasmine, how are you? Eddie, welcome in, brother. Let's see. I'm gonna open these up. Going without a script tonight, but that's okay. All right, let's see. I have two gothic horror stories tonight. One by the ever popular Algernon Blackwood, and the other by someone who I've not read here tonight, Sir Walter Scott. That's going to be a new one tonight. Well, give it another 2 minutes. Let some more people filter in, and then we'll get started. I'm not in a hurry tonight. I'm going to kind of take a leisurely approach to the evening. Hey, Marcy, welcome. How are you? I can't lie. I love the fact that I see the same names every night. It's nice to add new people, but knowing that I have so many regulars is wonderful. It really is. Hey, Michelle, how are you? Welcome in. Good to see you again. Telling you though, you guys keep saying it. One night I'm gonna come in here with a freaking phone book and just start reading it. Hey, Laya, how are you? Linda, hello. Welcome in. I got my super fan. I got super fans in the room, which is just awesome because you guys are awesome. Don't tempt me, Laya. Don't tempt me. If I ever get completely like off my rocker one night, I am gonna come in here with a phone book. You'll know when I've decided I want to give up when I start reading the phone book in my dirty voice. Hey, crazy mama, how old are you? Kirby, how are you? J.C. Penney catalogs. There you go. Wow, man. Does anybody remember like getting like the J.C. Penney and the Sears like Christmas wish books? Does anybody else remember that, or is it just me? So here's my question. When you were a kid and those showed up at your house, Michelle, did you circle everything? Or did you like grab a sheet of paper and just start writing everything down? And how detailed, if you did that, how detailed did you get? The Sears Wish book, yeah. Oh man, you got a sneak peek. Lucky. So like I would grab, so because it was usually, because there were 4 kids in my house. There were not full time, but there was myself, my baby sister, who's 4 years younger than me, and I still call her my baby sister. My stepbrother and my stepsister, and we would all take a chance. Oh, I'm sorry. And my dad, we would all like 5 of us, much to my mother's chagrin, would take a crack at the wish book, and because my dad would want toys and shit too, because he's just a big kid. But I would literally sit down with a sheet of notebook paper, and I would write down the name of it, what it was, the name of it, what page it was on, and how much it was. Hey, Wizardry, how are you, sir? Sir, ma'am, whatever. Person. I want to... I do that. Just, it's automatically, sir. Anyway, I would literally write down... the name, how much it was, and what page it was on. And then after I got done writing everything down, I would go back and get another sheet of paper, and I would write it down in the order that I wanted it. Yeah. Oh no, there was no got rats out there. There was no budget. It was just like free for all. We needed to just throw caution to the wind. It was whatever we wanted, and it was up to my parents as to whether or not they were going to get it or not. We knew that it was, that it was the wish list. It was not the I'm going to wake up on Christmas morning and have it under the tree list. And the most expensive, my parents always made sure that the most expensive presents, or the biggest presents, were always from them. Because my parents were big on the idea that wait a minute, Jasmine, did you just become a super fan? Thank you. I have 12 super fans now. I'm like 3 away from my goal of 15. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much. But yeah, no, now you're killing me. Buenos noches, Queen. Hopefully I did that right. I don't speak Spanish. Like, I know, like, the little Spanish I know is from watching Sesame Street and Dora the Explorer with my kids. Sesame Street for myself. Because there were no like, the coolest characters on Sesame Street were Luis and Maria. They were just the coolest because they were just like this. It was. You're gonna get me started on my my Sesame Street nostalgia. So one of the things that I actually thought about doing, especially with the Trista, you are here. Stop. Great. What? Crazy Mama, you just became a super fan? That's amazing. Laya, thank you. I'm so generous. Damn it. You guys are gonna make me cry. Don't do that. You guys are gonna make me cry tonight. Here's Comic-Con in Chicago. Nice. It is good to be live again, Mystique. Thank you. Well, it is very much appreciated. Um, there is a and this isn't to diminish anyone that comes in here every week and every night and doesn't become a super fan, because I appreciate you just as much. But the fact that you guys are willing to take money and put it down and help keep me afloat, especially right now with as hard as a struggle as things are, means the world to me. Hi, Sky. How are you doing? Hey, Zoe. How are you? Geez, I'm gonna get all emotional here. I received a couple of very meaningful DMs over the last couple of days, and from regulars, followers, very important people. Means a lot to me, more than I can say. And thank you. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I mean, it's I'm not a religious person. I think anybody that knows me can tell you that. But if there is one thing that seems to be universal with all beliefs out there, it's take care of each other. Prove to each other that that we're all in this together. We're not alone. And that's one of the things, on top of just wanting to tell stories, it's one of the things that I hoped to build here. And it feels like we've managed to do that, and we did it together. And, it says something about, kindness. And it's almost like, it's like talk a lot about kindness, and this community proves to me that I'm not wrong. That this is the right thing. That leading with kindness is the right choice, even when it's difficult. Well, Crazy Mama, I appreciate that. And Sky, thank you. And anytime you want to say hi, you say hi. You let me know you're here, and I will say hi. Having a magical brownie in your eye. I had one of those earlier. Actually, it was a magical piece of chocolate. I'm not, I didn't want to get too, ethereal before story time. But anyway, that leads us, DL Garvin, how are you? Welcome in. It is good to see you. You just heard yours. You guys are amazing. Hey, Wendy. How are you? So, I have two stories for you tonight. I don't have a script, so I'm not going to go too deep into that. But I wanted to do a sort of gothic horror night, but more so gothic ghost story type of thing. Thank you, Tina. I appreciate it. Chew your milk. If you're chewing your milk, you might want to get new milk, or take it the rest of the way and make it cheese. Anyway, just My brain. Anyway. So, yeah, foods that are chewy that are not supposed to be are a problem. Yes. You are all I declare you all official Storytime goblins. And there will be something special related to that coming very, 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 very soon. Very soon. I just have to finish it. Okay, so I have two stories tonight. One is, as I mentioned earlier, is by an author that we have read many times before. That's Algernon Blackwood. The first story tonight is by an author who is, in certain circles, as famous, or if not more famous, than Algernon Blackwood, and that is by Sir Walter Scott. You guys are killing me. Are you guys going to make me change the goal already in one? You guys are amazing. Someone grab. You guys are killing me. All right, so before I start crying again, I am going I actually don't have graphics for these two stories tonight. I have been so behind all day catching up on a audiobook that I've been working on. So I didn't get time to, and I ended up falling asleep a lot. I ended up falling asleep taking an unscheduled nap. So anyway, this one is let's see. I don't even have any details on this one. That's the part that kills me. Okay, so this story was first published in 1828. Let's see. So this is an oldie. This is one of the older stories that we've read so far on Storytime. Let us begin, shall we? It very well could have been the chocolate, Tina. Okay. This one is called The Tapestried Chamber, or The Lady in the Square, by Sir Walter Scott. About the end of the American War, when the officers of Lord Cornwallis's army, which surrendered at Yorktown, and others who had been made prisoners during the impolitic and ill-fated controversy, were returning to their own country to relate their adventures and repose themselves after their fatigues, there was amongst them a general officer to whom Miss S. gave the name of Brown, but merely, as I understood, to save the inconvenience of introducing a nameless agent in the narrative. He was an officer of merit, as well as a gentleman of high consideration for family and attainments. Some business had carried General Brown upon a tour through the western counties, when, in the conclusion of a morning stage, he found himself in the vicinity of a small country town, which presented a scene of uncommon beauty and of a character peculiarly English. Well, latrine, I very much appreciate it. Katie Cost, this is called The Tapestried Chamber, or The Lady in the Square, by Sir Walter Scott. Something I'd like to point out is the fact that this was published in 1828. The very first line is interesting. About the end of the American War, when the officers of Lord Cornwallis's army, which surrendered at Yorktown, and others who had been made prisoners during the impolitic and ill-fated controversy. I love the way he describes the Revolution from the perspective of an Englishman. I think it's quite wild. You guys are killing me. Okay. All right. Fine. Fine. If you're going to be like that, I'm going to go ahead and update I'm going to update it to 20. You guys are amazing. And I love each and every one of you. This means the world to me. It really does. Oh, loyalist, yes. But it's the perspective, the difference in how they talk about it is really interesting to me. But that's just me. Anyway, the little town with its stately old church, whose tower bore testimony to the devotion of ages long past, lay amidst pasture and cornfields of small extent, but bounded and divided with hedgerow timber of great age and size. There were few marks of modern improvement. The environs of the place intimated neither the solitude of decay nor the bustle of novelty. The houses were old, but in good repair, and the beautiful little river murmured freely on its way to the left of the town, neither restrained by a dam nor bordered by a towing path. Upon a gentle eminence, nearly a mile to the southward of the town, were seen amongst many venerable oaks and tangled thickets the turrets of a castle as old as the wars of York and Lancaster, but which seemed to have received important alterations during the age of Elizabeth and her successors. It had not been a place of great size, but whatever accommodation it formerly afforded was, it must be supposed, still to be obtained within its walls, at least such as the inference which General Brown drew from observing the smoke arise merrily from several of the ancient weathered carved chimney stalks. The wall of the park ran alongside of the highway for 200 or 300 yards, and through the different points by which the eye found glimpses into the woodland scenery, it seemed to be well stocked. Other points of view opened in succession, now a full one of the old castle, and now a side glimpse of its particular towers, the former rich in all the bizarrerie of the Elizabethan school, while the simple solid strength of other parts of the building seemed to show that they had been raised more for deference than ostentation. Delighted with the partial glimpses which he obtained of the castle through the woods and glades by which this ancient feudal fortress was surrounded, our military traveler has determined to inquire whether it might not deserve a nearer view, and whether it contained family pictures or other objects of curiosity worthy of a stranger's visit. When, leaving the vicinity of the park, he rolled through a clean and well-paved street, and stopped at the door of a well-frequented inn. Before ordering horses to proceed on his journey, General Brown made inquiries concerning the proprietor of the chateau which had so attracted his admiration, and was equally surprised and pleased at hearing in reply a nobleman named, whom we should call Lord Woodville. How fortunate! Much of Brown's early recollections, both at school and at college, had been connected with young Woodville, whom, by a few questions, he now ascertained to be the same with the owner of this fair domain. He had been raised to the peerage by the decease of his father in a few months before, and, as the general learned from the landlord, the term of mourning being ended, was now taking possession of his paternal estate, in the jovial season of merry autumn, accompanied by a select party of friends to enjoy the sports of a country famous for game. This was delightful news to our traveler. Frank Woodville had been Richard Brown's fag at Eton, and his chosen intimate at Christ Church. Their pleasures and their tasks had been the same, and the honest soldier's heart warmed to find his early friend in possession of so delightful a residence, and of an estate, as the landlord assured him with a nod and a wink, fully adequate to maintain and add to his dignity. Nothing was more natural than that the traveler should suspend a journey, which there was nothing to render hurried, to pay a visit to an old friend under such agreeable circumstances. The fresh horses, therefore, had only the brief task of conveying the general's traveling carriage to Woodville Castle. A porter admitted them at a modern Gothic lodge built in that style to correspond with the castle itself, and at the same time rang a bell to give warning of the approach of visitors. Apparently the sound of the bell had suspended the separation of the company, bent on the various amusements of the morning, for, on entering the court of the chateau, several young men were lounging about in their sporting dresses, looking at and criticizing the dogs which keepers held in readiness to attend their pastime. As General Brown alighted, the young lord came to the gate of the hall, and for an instant gazed as at a stranger upon the countenance of his friend, on which war, with its fatigues and its wounds, had made a great alteration. But the uncertainty lasted no longer than till the visitor had spoken, and the hearty greeting which followed was such as can only be exchanged betwixt those who had passed together merry days of careless boyhood or early youth. "If I could have formed a wish, my dear Brown," said Lord Woodville, "it would have been to have you here of all men upon this occasion, which my friends are good enough to hold as a sort of holiday. Do not think you have been unwatched during the years you have been absent from us. I have traced you through your dangers, your triumphs, your misfortunes, and was delighted to see that, whether in victory or defeat, the name of my old friend was always distinguished with applause." The general made a suitable reply, and congratulated his friend on new dignities, and the possession of a place and domain so beautiful. "Nay, you have seen nothing of it as yet," said Lord Woodville, "and I trust you do not mean to leave us till you are better acquainted with it. It is true, I confess, that my present party is pretty large, and the old house, like other places of the kind, does not possess so much accommodation as the extent of the outward walls appears to promise. But we can give you a comfortable old-fashioned room, and I venture to suppose that your campaigns have taught you to be glad of worse quarters." The general shrugged his shoulders and laughed. "I presume," he said, "the worst apartment in your chateau is considerably superior to the old tobacco cask in which I was fain to take up my night's lodging when I was in the bush, as the Virginians call it, with the light corps. There I lay like Diogenes himself, so delighted with my covering from the elements that I made a vain attempt to have it rolled on to my next quarters. But my commander for the time would give way to no such luxurious provision, and I took my farewell of my beloved cask with tears in my eyes." "Well, then, since you do not fear your quarters," said Lord Woodville, "you will stay with me a week at least. Of guns, dogs, fishing rods, flies, and means of sport by sea and land, we have enough to spare. You cannot pitch on an amusement, but we will pitch on the means of pursuing it. If you prefer the gun and pointers, I will go with you myself, and see whether you have mended your shooting since you have been amongst the Indians of the back settlements." The general gladly accepted his friendly host's proposal in all its points. After a morning of manly exercise, the company met at dinner, where it was the delight of Lord Woodville to conduce to the display of the high properties of his recovered friend, so as to recommend him to his guests, most of whom were persons of distinction. He led General Brown to speak of the scenes he had witnessed, and as every word marked alike the brave officer and the sensible man who retained possession of his cool judgment under the most imminent dangers, the company looked upon the soldier with general respect, as on one who had proved himself possessed of an uncommon portion of personal courage, that attribute of all others which everybody desires to be thought possessed. The day at Woodville Castle ended as usual in such mansions. The hospitality stopped within the limits of good order. Music, in which the young lord was a proficient, succeeded to the circulation of the bottle. Cards and billiards, for those who preferred such amusements, were in readiness. But the exercise of the morning required early hours, and not long after 11 o'clock the guests began to retire to their several apartments. The young lord himself conducted his friend General Brown to the chamber destined for him, which answered the description he had given of it, being comfortable but old-fashioned. The bed was of a massive form used in the end of the 17th century, and the curtains of faded silk, heavily trimmed and tarnished gold. But then the sheets, pillows, and blankets looked delightful to the campaigner when he thought of his mansion, the cask. This story is called The Tapestried Chamber, or The Lady in the Square, by Sir Walter Scott. Just in case anyone's wondering. I see that there was a question about that. First published in 1828. There was an air of gloom in the tapestry hangings which, with their worn-out graces, curtained the walls of the little chamber, and gently undulated as the autumnal breeze found its way through the ancient lattice window, which pattered and whistled as the air gained entrance. The toilet, too, with its mirror, turbaned after the manner of the beginning of the century, with a coiffure of moire-colored silk, and its 100 strange-shaped boxes, providing for arrangements which had been obsolete for more than 50 years, had an antique and, in so far, a melancholy aspect. But nothing could blaze more brightly and cheerfully than the 2 large wax candles, or, if aught could rival them, it was the flaming bickering of the chimney that sent at once their gleam and their warmth through the snug apartment, which, notwithstanding the general antiquity of its appearance, was not wanting in the least convenience that modern habits rendered either necessary or desirable. Though I'm glad you're enjoying it, Foxcora. "This is an old-fashioned sleeping apartment, General," said the young lord. "But I hope you will find nothing that makes you envy your old tobacco cask." "I am not particular respecting my lodgings," replied the general. "Yet, were I to make any choice, I would prefer this chamber by many degrees to the gayer and more modern rooms of your family mansion. Believe me that when I unite its modern air of comfort with its venerable antiquity, and recollect that it is your lordship's property, I shall feel in better quarters here than if I were in the best hotel London could afford." "I trust, I have no doubt, that you will find yourself as comfortable as I wish you, my dear General," said the young nobleman. And once more, bidding his guest good night, he shook him by the hand and withdrew. The general once more looked round him, and internally congratulating himself on his return to peaceful life, the comforts of which were endeared by the recollection of the hardships and dangers he had lately sustained, undressed himself, and prepared himself for a luxurious night's rest. Here, contrary to the custom of this species of tale, We leave the general in possession of his apartment until the next morning. The company assembled for breakfast at an early hour, but without the appearance of General Brown, who seemed the guest that Lord Woodville was desirous of honoring above all whom his hospitality had assembled around him. He more than once expressed the surprise at the general's absence, and at length sent a servant to make inquiry after him. The man brought back information that General Brown had been walking abroad since an early hour of the morning, in defiance of the weather, which was misty and ungenial. "The custom of a soldier," said the young nobleman to his friends. "Many of them acquire habitual vigilance, and cannot sleep after the early hour at which their duty usually commands them to be alert." Yet the explanation which Lord Woodville thus offered the company seemed hardly satisfactory to his own mind, and it was in a fit of silence and abstraction that he awaited the return of the general. It took place near an hour after the breakfast bell had rung. He looked fatigued and feverish. His hair, the powdering and arrangement of which was at this time one of the most important occupations of a man's whole day, and marked his fashion as much as, in the present time, the tying of a cravat, or the want of one who was dishevelled, uncurled, void of powder, and dank with dew. His clothes were huddled on with careless negligence, remarkable in the military man, whose real or supposed duties are usually held to include some attention to the toilet, and his looks were haggard and ghastly in a peculiar degree. "So you have stolen a march upon this morning, my dear General," said Lord Woodville. "Or have you not found your bed so much to your mind as I hoped, and you seem to expect? How did you rest last night?" "Oh, excellently well. Remarkably well. Never better in my life," said General Brown rapidly, and yet with an air of embarrassment which was obvious to his friend. He then hastily swallowed a cup of tea, and, neglecting or refusing whatever else was offered, seemed to fall into a fit of abstraction. "Will you take the gun today, General?" said his friend and host, but had to repeat the question twice ere he received the abrupt answer. "No, my lord. I'm sorry I cannot have the honor of spending another day with your lordship. My post horses are ordered, who will be here directly." All who were present showed surprise, and Lord Woodville immediately replied, "Post horses, my good friend! What can you possibly want with them, when you promised to stay with me quietly for at least a week?" "I believe," said the general, obviously much embarrassed, "that I might, in the pleasure of my first meeting with your lordship, have said something about stopping here a few days, but I have since found it altogether impossible." "That is very extraordinary," answered the young nobleman. "You seemed quite disengaged yesterday, and you cannot have had a summons today, for our post has not come up from the town, and therefore you cannot have received any letters." General Brown, without giving any further explanation, muttered something of indispensable business, and insisted on the absolute necessity of his departure in a manner which silenced all opposition on the part of his host, who saw that his resolution was taken, and forbore further importunity. "At least, however," he said, "permit me, my dear Brown, since you go will or must, to show you the view from the terrace, which the mist that is now rising will soon display." He threw open a sash window and stepped down upon the terrace as he spoke. The general followed him mechanically, but seemed little to attend to what his host was saying, as, looking across an extended and rich prospect, he pointed out the different objects worthy of observation. Thus they moved on till Lord Woodville had attained his purpose of drawing his guest entirely apart from the rest of the company, when, turning upon him with an air of great solemnity, he addressed him thus: "Richard Brown, my old and very dear friend, We are now alone. Let me conjure you to answer me upon the word of a friend, and the honor of a soldier. How did you in reality rest last night?" "Most wretchedly indeed, my lord," answered the general in the same tone of solemnity. "So miserably that I could not risk the risk of such a second night, not only for all the lands belonging to this castle, but for all the country which I see from this elevated point of view." "This is most extraordinary," said the young lord, as if speaking to himself. "Then there must be something in the reports concerning that apartment." Again, to the general, he said, "For God's sake, my dear friend, be candid with me, and let me know the disagreeable particulars which have befallen you under a roof where, with consent of the owner, you should have met nothing save comfort." The general seemed distressed by this appeal, and paused a moment before he replied. "My dear lord," he at length said, "what happened to me last night is of nature so peculiar and so unpleasant that I could hardly bring myself to detail it even to your lordship, were it not that, independent of my wish to gratify any request of yours, I think that sincerity on my part may lead to some explanation about a circumstance equally painful and mysterious. To others, the communications I am about to make might place me in the light of a weak-minded, superstitious fool who suffered his own imagination to delude and bewilder him. But you have known me in childhood and youth, and will not suspect me of having adopted in manhood the feelings and frailties from which my early years were free." Here he paused, and his friend replied, "Do not doubt my perfect confidence in the truth of your communication, however strange it may be," replied Lord Woodville. "I know your firmness of disposition too well to suspect you could be made the object of imposition, and am aware that your honor and your friendship will equally deter you from exaggerating whatever you may have witnessed." "Well, then," said the general, "I will proceed with my story as well as I can, relying upon your candor, and yet distinctly feeling that I would rather face a battery than recall to my mind the odious recollections of last night." He paused a second time, and then, perceiving the Lord Woodville remained silent, in an attitude of attention, he commenced, though not without obvious reluctance, the history of his night's adventures in the tapestried chamber. Rain and thunder and the story wings. I guess we'll see how good of a combination that turns out to be. "I undressed and went to bed so soon after your lordship left me yesterday evening, but the wood in the chimney, which nearly fronted my bed, blazed brightly and cheerfully, and, aided by 100 exciting recollections of my childhood and youth, which had been recalled by the unexpected pleasure of meeting your lordship, prevented me from falling immediately to sleep. I ought, however, to say that these reflections were all of a pleasant and agreeable kind, grounded in a sense of having for a time exchanged the labor, fatigues, and dangers of my profession for the enjoyments of a peaceful life, and the reunion of those friendly and affectionate ties which I had torn asunder at the rude summons of war. While such pleasing reflections were stealing over my mind and gradually lulling me to slumber, I was suddenly aroused by a sound like that of a rustling of a silken gown and the tapping of a pair of high-heeled shoes, as if a woman were walking in the apartment. There I could draw the curtain to see what the matter was, the figure of a little woman passed between the bed and the fire. The back of this form was turned to me, and I could observe from the shoulders and neck it was that of an old woman, whose dress was an old-fashioned gown, which I think ladies call a sack. That is, a sort of robe, completely loose in the body, but gathered into broad plaits upon the neck and shoulders, which fall down to the ground and terminate in a species of train. I thought the intrusion singular enough, but never harbored for a moment the idea that what I saw was anything more than the mortal form of some old woman about the establishment, who had a fancy dress like her grandmother, and who, having perhaps, as your lordship mentioned, that you were rather straitened for room, being dislodged from her chamber for my accommodation, had forgotten the circumstances and returned by 12 to her old haunt. Under this persuasion I moved myself in bed and coughed a little, to make the intruder sensible of my being in possession of the premises. She turned round slowly. But gracious heaven! My lord, what a countenance she did display to me! There was no longer any question what she was, or any thought of her being a living being, upon a face which wore the fixed features of a corpse, were imprinted the traces of the vilest and most hideous passions which had animated her while she lived. The body of some atrocious criminal seemed to have been given up from the grave, and the soul restored from the penial fire, in order to form for a space a union with the ancient accomplice of its guilt. I started up in bed and sat upright, supporting myself on my palms as I gazed on this horrible spectre. The hag made, as it seemed, a single and swift stride to the bed where I lay, and squatted herself down upon it, in precisely the same attitude which I had assumed in the extremity of horror, advancing her diabolical countenance within half a yard of mine, with a grin which seemed to intimate the malice and the derision of an incarnate fiend. Here General Brown stopped, and wiped from his brow the cold perspiration which the recollection of this horrible vision had covered it. "My lord," he said, "I am no coward. I have been in the mortal dangers incidental to my profession, and I may truly boast that no man ever knew Richard Brown dishonor the sword he wears. But in these horrible circumstances, under the eyes, and as it seemed, almost in the grasp of an incarnation of an evil spirit, all firmness forsook me. All manhood melted from me like wax in the furnace, and I felt my hair individually bristle. The current of my life-blood ceased to flow, and I sank back in a swoon, as very a victim to panic terror as ever was a village girl or a child of 10 years old. How long I lay in this condition I cannot pretend to guess. But I was roused by the castle clock striking 1 so loud that it seemed as if it were in the very room. It was some time before I dared open my eyes, lest they should again encounter the horrible spectacle. When, however, I summoned my courage to look up, she was no longer visible. My first idea was to pull my bell, wake the servants, and remove to a garret or a hayloft to be insured against a second visitation. Nay, I will confess the truth. that my resolution was altered not by the shame of exposing myself, but by the very fear that, as the bell cord hung by the chimney, I might, in making my way to it, be again crossed by the fiendish hag, who, I figured to myself, might still be lurking about some corner of the apartment. I will not pretend to describe what hot and cold fever fits tormented me for the rest of the night. Through broken sleep, weary vigils, and that dubious state which forms the neutral ground between them, 100 terrible objects appeared to haunt me. But there was the great difference betwixt the vision which I have described and those which followed, that I knew the last to be deceptions of my own fancy and overexcited nerves. Day at last, and I rose from my bed ill in health and humiliated in mind. I was ashamed of myself as a man and a soldier, and still more so at feeling my own extreme desire to escape from the haunted apartment, which, however, conquered all other considerations, so that, huddling on my clothes with the most careless haste, I made my escape from your lordship's mansion, to seek in the open air some relief to my nervous system, shaken as it was by this horrible rencontre with a visitant, for such I must believe her from the other world. Your lordship has now heard the cause of my discomposure, and of my sudden desire to leave your hospitable castle. In other places I trust we may often meet, but God protect me from ever spending a second night under that roof. Strange as the general's tale was, he spoke with such a deep air of conviction that it cut short the usual commentaries which are made on such stories. Lord Woodville never once asked him if he was sure he did not dream of the apparition, or suggested any of the possibilities by which it is fashionable to explain supernatural appearances, as wild vagaries of fancy or deceptions of the optic nerves. On the contrary, he seemed deeply impressed with the truth and reality of what he had heard, and after a considerable pause regretted with much appearance of sincerity that his early friend should in his house have suffered so severely. "I am the more sorry for your pain, my dear Brown," he continued, "that it is the unhappy though most unexpected result of an experiment of my own. You must know that for my father and grandfather's time, at least, the apartment which was assigned to you last night had been shut on account of reports that it was disturbed by supernatural sights and noises. When I came a few weeks since into the possession of the estate, I thought the accommodation which the castle afforded for my friends was not extensive enough to permit the inhabitants of the invisible world to retain possession of a comfortable sleeping apartment. I therefore caused the tapestried chamber, as we called it, to be opened, and without destroying its air of antiquity, I had such new articles of furniture placed in it as became the modern times. Yet, as the opinion that the room was haunted very strongly prevailed among the domestics, and was also known in the neighborhood and to many of my friends, I feared some prejudice might be entertained by the first occupant of the tapestried chamber, which might tend to revive the evil report which I had labored under, and so disappoint my purpose of rendering it a useful part of the house. I must confess, my dear Brown, that your arrival yesterday, agreeable to me for 1,000 reasons besides, seemed the most favorable opportunity of removing the unpleasant rumors which attached to the room, since your courage was indubitable, and your mind free of any preoccupation on the subject. I could not, therefore, have chosen a more fitting subject for my experiment. Upon my life, said General Brown somewhat hastily, I am infinitely obliged to your lordship. Very particularly indebted indeed. I am likely to remember for some time the consequences of the experiment, as your lordship is pleased to call it. Nay, now you are unjust, my dear friend, said Lord Woodville. You have only to reflect for a single moment, in order to be convinced that I could not augur the possibility of the pain to which you have been so unhappily exposed. Was yesterday morning a complete skeptic on the subject of supernatural appearances. Nay, I am sure that had I told you what was said of that room, those very reports would have induced you, by your own choice, to select it for your accommodation. It was my misfortune, perhaps my error, but really cannot be termed my fault that you have been afflicted so strangely. Strangely indeed, said the general, resuming his good temper, and I acknowledge that I have no right to be offended with your lordship for treating me like what I used to think of myself, a man of some firmness and courage. But I see my post-horses have arrived, and I must not detain your lordship from your amusement. Nay, my old friend, said Lord Woodville, since you cannot stay with us another day, which I indeed can no longer urge, give me at least half an hour more. You used to love pictures, and I have a gallery of portraits, some of them by Van Dyck, representing ancestry to whom this property and castle formerly belonged. I think that several of them will strike you as possessing merit. General Brown accepted the invitation, though somewhat unwillingly. It was evident he was not to breathe freely or at ease until he left Woodville Castle far behind him. He could not refuse his friend's invitation, however, and the less so that he was a little ashamed of the peevishness which he had displayed towards his well-meaning entertainer. The general, therefore, followed Lord Woodville through several rooms, into a long gallery hung with pictures, which the latter pointed out to his guest, telling the names and giving some account of the personages whose portraits presented themselves in progression. General Brown was but little interested in the details which these accounts conveyed to him. They were, indeed, of the kind which are usually found in an old family gallery. Here was a cavalier who had ruined the estate in the royal cause, there a fine lady who had reinstated it by contracting a match with a wealthy Roundhead. There hung a gallant who had been in danger for corresponding with the exiled court of Saint Germain. Here one who had taken arms for William at the Revolution, and there a third that had thrown his weight alternately into the scale of Whig and Tory. While Lord Woodville was cramming these words into his guest's ear against the stomach of his sense, they gained the middle of the gallery. When he beheld General Brown suddenly start, and assume an attitude of utmost surprise, not unmixed with fear, as his eyes were caught and suddenly riveted by a portrait of an old lady in a sack, the fashionable dress at the end of the 17th century. "There she is!" he exclaimed. "There she is in form and features, though inferior in demoniac expression to the accursed hag who visited me last night." "If that be the case," said the young nobleman, "there can remain no longer any doubt of the horrible reality of your apparition. That is the picture of a wretched ancestress of mine, of whose crimes a black and fearful catalogue is recorded in a family history under my charter chest. The recital of them would be too horrible. It is enough to say that in yon fatal apartment incest and unnatural murder were committed. I will restore it to the solitude to which the better judgment of those who preceded me had consigned it. And never shall anyone, so long as I can prevent it, be exposed to a repetition of the supernatural horrors which could shake such courage as yours. Thus, the friends who had met with such glee parted in a very different mood. Lord Woodville to command the tapestried chamber to be unmantled and the door built up, and General Brown to seek in some less beautiful country, with some less dignified friend, forgetfulness of the painful night which he had passed in Woodville Castle. I'm kind of thinking the general had every right to be pissed. Like, I was like waiting for there to be one point where he turned and looked at the Lord and went, "Are you fucking serious right now? Did you just throw me to the wolves? What the are you kidding me?" I was waiting for him to be like really pissed off. But being all noble and such, they had to, no, of course, it's no big deal. Yes, it's a big deal. You just experimented on my ass. No. The general had a court-martial here. Experimenting on your friends is not cool. Yes. Yep, absolutely. Well, hello there over on the tubes. It's good to see you. I see you. I'm aware of you. And I thank you for being here. Anyway, enough of those shenanigans. Shenanigans? Don't you know you have shenanigans? It was good. It's one of those, like, you kind of, because of where we are in relation to the story, because that is such an early example of Gothic horror, that particular trope has been used over and over again since then, to varying degrees of success. So it was a little easy to kind of see where it was headed, especially when he said, "I want to show you some portraits." Let's go look at some pictures so you can be shocked and identify the old woman that was in the room with you that night. Because I'm not a very nice person. Oh, goodness. So, how are we all doing tonight? Good, I hope. I hope we're all doing well. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, you won 3 games of solitaire. Well, sir, I applaud you. All applaud and hail the solitaire master that is Buford. I mean that sincerely because I suck at solitaire. Which I'm not sure anybody can suck at solitaire, but I do. So for those of you that are joining us for the first time, my name is UndeadPapa. Most people around here call me Papa. You can call me whatever you want, really. I don't mind. I go live 4 nights a week. Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, all at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time till 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sundays and Mondays are generally family-friendly nights where we read chapter books. Last week we did picture books. And this coming weekend we'll be reading the second book in the series of Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne. It is The House at Pooh Corner. We'll be reading that Sunday and Monday. So feel free to join us in. Bring the kids, bring the grandkids, or bring your inner 5-year-old, as I have been known to say. and join us. It'll be fun. Wednesdays and Fridays are generally for short stories of varying genres, anything from science fiction to horror to thriller to mystery to all those fun things. So if that's the kind of thing you enjoy and you're enjoying tonight, please hang out, follow, set the notifications so you know when I'm live. And we hope to see you again. I'm not done for tonight. I know I'm talking like I might be, but I'm not. This is just sort of my midway transition to the second story, which I shall continue to transition into right now. So the second story is by a popular author that we've read many, many times here on Storytime with UndeadPapa. Some of the best gothic horror stories that we've ever read. Stories like The Wendigo and The Willows, The Man Who Found Out. This one is Smith, an episode in a lodging house by Eldredon Blackwood. Those of you that have heard Blackwood before know that you're in for a treat. Yes, and we got the Jim Jams. I'm planning on having the Jim Jams before the night's over. I'm going to put it on some toast. Mm-hmm. When I was a medical student, began the doctor, half turning towards his circle of listeners in the firelight, I came across one or two very curious human beings, but there was one fellow I remember particularly, for he caused me the most vivid and I think the most uncomfortable emotions I have ever known. For many months I knew Smith only by name as the occupant of the floor above me. Obviously, his name meant nothing to me. Moreover, I was busy with lectures, readings, clinics, and the like, and had little leisure to devise plans for scraping acquaintance with any of the other lodgers in the house. Then chance brought us curiously together, and this fellow Smith left a deep impression upon me as the result of our first meeting. At the time, the strength of this first impression seemed quite inexplicable to me. But looking back at the episode now from a standpoint of greater knowledge, I judge the fact to have been that he stirred my curiosity to an unusual degree, and at the same time awakened my sense of horror, whatever that may be in a medical student. About as deeply and permanently as these two emotions were capable of being stirred at all in the particular system and set of nerves called me. He knew that I was interested in the study of languages, was something I could never explain, but one day, quite unannounced, he came Let me back up and start that sentence over again because it makes no sense the way I just said it. How he knew that I was interested in the study of languages was something I could never explain. But one day, quite unannounced, he came quietly into my room in the evening and asked me point-blank if I knew enough Hebrew to help him in the pronunciation of certain words. He caught me along the line of least resistance, and I was greatly flattered to be able to give him the desired information. But it was only when he had thanked me and was gone that I realized that I had been in the presence of an unusual individuality. For the life of me, I could not seize the label of the peculiarities of which I felt to be a very striking personality, but it was borne in upon me that he was a man apart from his fellows, a mind that followed a line leading away from ordinary human intercourse and human interests into the regions that left in his atmosphere something remote, rarefied, chilling. The moment he was gone, I became conscious of two things: an intense curiosity to know more about this man and what his real interests were, and secondly, the fact that my skin was crawling and that my hair had a tendency to rise. The doctor paused a moment where to puff hard at his pipe, which, however, had gone out beyond recall without the assistance of a match. And in the deep silence which testified to the genuine interest of his listeners, someone poked the fire up into a little blaze, and in one or two others glanced over their shoulders into the dark distances of the big hall. On looking back, he went on, watching the momentary flames in the grate, I see a short, thick-set man of perhaps 45, with immense shoulders and small, slender hands. The contrast was noticeable, for I remember thinking that such a giant frame and such slim finger bones hardly belonged together. His head, too, was large and very long, the head of an idealist beyond all question, yet with an unusually strong development of the jaw and chin. Here again was a singular contradiction, though I am better able now to appreciate its full meaning, with a greater experience in judging the values of physiognomy. We're just going to say that it's a word. Physiognomy. Yeah, physiognomy. We're going to just go with that. My apologies. Some of these words, you get some of these words in like the early 20th and late 19th century stories that it's like, did they make that up? I'm pretty sure they made that up. But then you go look and it's an actual word. It's just not used anymore. For this meant, of course, an enthusiastic idealism, balanced and kept in check by will and judgment, elements usually deficient in dreamers and visionaries. At any rate, here was a being with probably a very wide range of possibilities, a machine with a pendulum that most likely had an unusual length of swing. The man's hair was exceedingly fine, and the lines about his nose and mouth were cut as with a delicate steel instrument in wax. His eyes I have left to the last. They were large and quite changeable, not in color only, but in character, size, and shape. Occasionally they seemed the eyes of someone else, if you can understand what I mean, and at the same time, in their shifting shades of blue, green, and a nameless sort of dark gray, there was a sinister light in them that lent to the whole face an aspect almost alarming. Moreover, they were the most luminous optics I think I have ever seen in any human being. There, then, at the risk of a wearisome description, is Smith as I saw him for the first time that winter's evening in my shabby student's rooms in Edinburgh. And yet, the real part of him, of course, I have left untouched, for it is both indescribable and unget-atable. I have spoken already of an atmosphere of warning and aloofness he carried about with him. It is impossible to further analyze the series of little shocks his presence always communicated to my being, but there was that about him which made me instantly in the qui-vive in his presence. On every nerve alert, every sense strained and on the watch. I do not mean that he deliberately suggested danger, but rather that he brought forces in his wake which automatically warned the nervous centers of my system to be on their guard and alert. Since the days of my first acquaintance with this man, I have lived through other experiences and have seen much I cannot pretend to explain or understand, but so far in my life, I have only once come across a human being who suggested a disagreeable familiarity with unholy things, and who made me feel uncanny and creepy in his presence, and that unenviable individual was Mr. Smith. What his occupation was during the day I never knew. I think he slept until the sun set. No one ever saw him on the stairs or heard him move in his room during the day. He was a creature of the shadows, who apparently preferred darkness to light. Our landlady either knew nothing or would say nothing. At any rate, she found no fault, and I have since wondered often by what magic this fellow was able to convert a common landlady of a common lodging-house into a discreet and uncommunicative person. This alone was a sign of genius of some sort. "He's been here with me for years, long before you come, and I don't interfere or ask no questions of what doesn't concern me, as long as people pays their rent," was the only remark on the subject I ever succeeded in winning from that quarter. And it certainly told me nothing, nor gave me any encouragement to ask for further information. Examinations, however, and the general excitement of a medical student's life for a time put Mr. Smith completely out of my head. For a long period he did not call upon me again, and for my part I felt no courage to return his unsolicited visit. Just then, however, there came a change in the fortunes of those who controlled my very limited income, and I was obliged to give up my ground floor and move aloft to more modest chambers on the top of the house. Here I was directly over Smith, and had to pass his door to reach my own. It so happened that about this time I was frequently called out at all hours of the night for the maternity cases which a fourth-year student takes at certain period of his studies, and on returning from one of these visits at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was surprised to hear the sound of voices as I passed his door. A peculiar sweet odor, too, not unlike the smell of incense, penetrated into the passage. I went upstairs very quietly, wondering what was going on there at this hour of the morning. To my knowledge, Smith never had visitors. For a moment I hesitated outside the door with one foot on the stairs. All my interest in this strange man revived, and my curiosity rose to a point not far from action. At last I might learn something of the habits of this lover of the night and the darkness. The sound of voices was plainly audible, Smith's predominating so much that I never catch more than points of sound from the other, penetrating now and then the steady stream of his voice. Not a single word reached me, at least not a word that I could understand, though the voice was loud and distinct. It was only afterwards that I realized he must have been speaking in a foreign language. The sound of footsteps, too, was equally distinct. 2 persons were moving about the room, passing and repassing the door, one of them a light, agile person, and the other ponderous and somewhat awkward. Smith's voice went on incessantly with its odd, monotonous droning, now loud, now soft, as he crossed and recrossed the floor. The other person was also on the move, but in a different and less regular fashion, for I heard rapid steps that seemed to end sometimes in stumbling, and a quick sudden movements that brought up with a violent lurching against the wall or furniture. As I listened to Smith's voice, moreover, I began to feel afraid. There was something in the sound that made me feel intuitively he was in a tight place, and an impulse stirred faintly in me, very faintly, I admit, to knock at the door and inquire if he needed help. But long before the impulse could translate itself into an act, or even before it had been properly weighed and considered by the mind, I heard a voice close beside me in the air, a sort of hushed whisper which I am certain was Smith speaking. Though the sound did not seem to have come to me through the door, it was close in my very ear. As though he stood beside me, and it gave me such a start that I clutched the banisters to save myself from stepping backwards and making a clatter on the stairs. "There is nothing you can do to help me," it said distinctly, "and you will be much safer in your own room." I am ashamed to this day at the pace at which I covered the flight of stairs into the darkness to the top floor, and of the shaking hand with which I lit my candles and bolted the door. But there it is, just as it happened. This midnight episode, so odd and yet so trivial in itself, fired me with more curiosity than ever about my fellow lodger. It also made me connect him in my mind with a sense of fear and distrust. I never saw him, yet I was often and uncomfortably aware of his presence in the upper regions of that gloomy lodging-house. Smith and his secret mode of life and mysterious pursuits somehow contrived to awaken in my being a line of reflection that disturbed my comfortable condition of ignorance. I never saw him, as I have said, and exchanged with no sort of communication with him. Yet it seemed to me that his mind was in contact with mine, and some of the strange forces of his atmosphere filtered through into my being and disturbed my equilibrium. Those upper floors became haunted for me after dark, and though outwardly our lives never came into contact, I became unwillingly involved in certain pursuits on which his mind was centered. I felt that he was somehow making use of me against my will, and by methods which passed my comprehension. It was at that time, moreover, in the heavy, unquestioning state of materialism which is common to medical students when they begin to understand something of the human anatomy and nervous system, and jump at once to the conclusion that they control the universe and hold in their forceps the last word of life and death. I knew it all, and regarded a belief in anything beyond matter as wanderings of weak or at best untrained minds. And this condition of mind, of course, added to the strength of this upsetting fear and began slowly to take possession of me. Though I kept no notes of the subsequent events in this matter, they made too deep an impression for me to ever forget the sequence in which they occurred. Without difficulty, I can recall the next step in the adventure with Smith, for adventure it rapidly grew to be. The doctor stopped a moment and laid his pipe on the table behind him before continuing. The fire had burned low, and no one stirred to poke it. The silence in the great hall was so deep that when the speaker's pipe touched the table, the sound woke audible echoes at the far end among the shadows. One evening, while I was reading, the door of my room opened, and Smith came in. He made no attempt at ceremony. It was after 10 o'clock, and I was tired. But the presence of the man immediately galvanized me into activity. My attempts at ordinary politeness he thrust on one side at once, and he began asking me to vocalize, then pronounce for him certain Hebrew words. And when this was done, he abruptly inquired if I was not the fortunate possessor of a very rare rabbinical treatise, which he named. How he knew that I possessed this book puzzled me exceedingly. But I was still more surprised to see him cross the room and take it out of my bookshelf, almost before I had time to answer in the affirmative. Evidently, he knew exactly where it was kept. This excited my curiosity beyond all bounds, and I immediately began asking him questions, and though out of sheer respect for the man, I put them very delicately to him and almost by way of mere conversation. He had only one reply for the lot. He would look up at me from the pages of the book with an expression of complete comprehension on his extraordinary features, would bow his head a little and say very gravely, "That, of course, is a perfectly proper question," which was absolutely all I could ever get out of him. On this particular occasion, he stayed with me perhaps 10 or 15 minutes. When he went quickly downstairs to his room with my Hebrew treatise in his hand, I heard him close and bolt his door. But a few moments later, before I had time to settle down to my book again, or to recover from the surprise his visit has caused me, I heard the door open, and there stood Smith once again beside my chair. He made no excuse for his second interruption, but bent his own head down to the level of my reading lamp and peered across the flame straight into my eyes. "I hope," he whispered, "I hope you are never disturbed at night?" "Eh?" I stammered. "Disturbed at night? Oh, no, thanks. At least not that I know of." "I am glad," he replied gravely, appearing not to notice my confusion and surprise at his question. "But remember, should it ever be the case, please let me know at once." And he was gone down the stairs into his room again. For some minutes I sat reflecting upon his strange behavior. He was not mad, I argued, but was the victim of some harmless delusion that had gradually grown upon him as a result of his solitary mode of life, and from the books he used, I judged that it was something to do with the medieval magic or some system of ancient Hebrew mysticism. The words he asked me to pronounce for him were probably words of power, which, when uttered with the vehemence of a strong will behind them, were supposed to produce physical results, or set up vibrations in one's own inner being that had the effect of a partial lifting of the veil. I sat thinking about the man, and his way of living, and the probable effects of the long run of his dangerous experiments, and I can recall perfectly well the sensation of disappointment that crept over me when I realized that I had labeled his particular form of aberration, and that my curiosity would therefore no longer be excited. For some time I had been sitting alone with these reflections. It may have been 10 minutes, or it may have been half an hour, when I was aroused from my reverie by the knowledge that someone was again in the room standing close beside my chair. My first thought was that Smith had come back again in his swift, unaccountable manner, but almost at the same moment I realized that this could not be the case at all, for the door faced my position, and it certainly had not been opened again. Yet someone was in the room, moving cautiously to and fro, watching me, almost touching me. I was as sure of it as I was of myself, and though at the moment I do not think I was actually afraid, I am bound to admit that a certain weakness came over me, and that I felt that strange disinclination for action which is probably the beginning of the horrible paralysis of real terror. I should have been glad to hide myself, if it had been possible, to cower into a corner or behind a door or anywhere so that I could not be watched and observed. But overcoming my nervousness with an effort of the will, I got up and quickly out of my chair and held the reading lamp aloft so that it shone into all corners all the corners like a searchlight. The room was utterly empty. It was utterly empty, at least to the eye, but to the nerves, and especially to that combination of sense perception which is made up by all the senses acting together, and by no one in particular, there was a person standing there at my very elbow. I say person, for I can think of no appropriate word. For if it was a human being, I can only affirm that I had the overwhelming conviction that it was not, but that it was some form of life wholly unknown to me, both as to its essence and its nature. A sensation of gigantic force and power came with it, and I remember vividly to this day my terror on realizing that I was close to an invisible being who could crush me as easily as I could crush a fly, and who could see my every moment while itself remaining invisible. To this terror was added the certain knowledge that the being kept in my proximity for a definite purpose, and that this purpose had some direct bearing upon my well-being, indeed upon my life, I was equally convinced. For I became aware of a sensation of growing lassitude, as though the vitality were being steadily drained out of my body. My heart began to beat irregularly at first, then faintly. I was conscious, even within a few minutes, of a general drooping of the powers of life in the whole system, an ebbing away of self-control, and a distinct approach of drowsiness and torpor. The power to move, or to think out any mode of resistance, was fast leaving me, when there rose in the distance, as it were, a tremendous commotion. A door opened with a clatter, and I heard the peremptory and commanding tones of a human voice calling aloud in a language I could not comprehend. It was Smith, my fellow lodger, calling up the stairs, and his voice had not sounded more than a few seconds when I felt something withdrawn from my presence, from my person, indeed from my very skin. It seemed as if there was a rushing of air, and some large creature swept by me at the level of my shoulders. Instantly the pressure on my heart was relieved, and the atmosphere seemed to resume its normal condition. Smith's door closed quietly downstairs as I put the lamp down with trembling hands. What had happened I do not know. Only I was alone again, and my strength was returning as rapidly as it had left me. I went across the room and examined myself in the glass. The skin was very pale and the eyes dull. My temperature, I found, was a little below normal, and my pulse faint and irregular. But these smaller signs of disturbance were as nothing compared with the feeling I had, though no outward signs bore testimony to the fact that I had narrowly escaped a real and ghastly catastrophe. I felt shaken, somehow shaken to the very roots of my being. The doctor rose from his chair and crossed over to the dying fire so that no one could see the expression on his face as he stood with his back to the grate, and continued his weird tale. "It would be wearisome," he went on in a lower voice, looking over our heads as though he still saw the dingy top floor of that haunted Edinburgh lodging-house. "It would be tedious for me at this length of time to analyze my feelings, or to attempt to reproduce for you the thorough examination to which I endeavored then to subject my whole being, intellectual, emotional, and physical. I need only mention the dominant emotion with which this curious episode left me, the indignant anger against myself that I could ever have lost my self-control enough to come under the sway of so gross and absurd a delusion. This protest, however, I remember making with all the emphasis possible, and I also remember noting that it brought me very little satisfaction, for it was the protest of my reason only, when all the rest of my being was up in arms against its conclusions. My dealings with the delusion, however, were not yet over for the night. Very early next morning, somewhere about 3 o'clock, I was awakened by a curiously stealthy noise in the room. And the next minute there followed a crash as if all my books had been swept bodily from their shelf onto the floor. But this time I was not frightened. Cursing the disturbance with all the resounding and harmless words I could accumulate, I jumped out of bed and lit the candle in a second, and in the first dazzle of the flaring match, but before the wick had time to catch, I was certain I saw a dark gray shadow of ungainly shape, and with something more or less like a human head, drive rapidly past the side of the wall farthest from me and disappear into the gloom by the angle of the door. I waited 1 single second to be sure the candle was lit, and then dashed after it. But before I had gone 2 steps, my foot stumbled against something hard piled up on the carpet, and I only just saved myself from falling headlong. I picked myself up and found that all the books from what I called my language shelf were strewn across the floor. The room, meanwhile, as a minute's search revealed, was quite empty. I looked in every corner and behind every stick of furniture, and a student's bedroom on the top floor costing 12 shillings a week did not hold many available hiding places, as you imagine. The crash, however, was explained. Some very practical and physical force had thrown the books from their resting place. That, at least, was beyond all doubt. And as I replaced them on the shelf and noted that not one was missing, I busied myself mentally with the sore problem of how the agent of this little practical joke had gained access to my room and then escaped again, for my door was locked and bolted. Smith's odd question as to whether I was disturbed in the night, and his warning injunction to let him know at once if such were the case, now of course returned to affect me as I stood there in the early morning, cold and shivering on the carpet. But I realized at the same moment how impossible it would be for me to admit that a more than usually vivid nightmare could have any connection with himself. I would rather stand 100 of these mysterious visitations than consult such a man as to their possible cause. A knock at the door interrupted my reflections, and I gave a start that sent the candle grease flying. "Let me in," came Smith's voice. I unlocked the door. He came in fully dressed. His face wore a serious pallor. It seemed to me to be under the skin and to shine through, almost make it luminous. His eyes were exceedingly bright. I was wondering what in the world to say to him, or how he would explain his visit at such an hour, when he closed the door behind him and came up close to me, uncomfortably close. "You should have called me at once," he said in his whispering voice, fixing his great eyes on my face. I stammered something about an awful dream, but he ignored my remark utterly, and I caught his eye wandering next, if any movement of those optics can be described as wandering, to the bookshelf. I watched him, unable to move my gaze from his person. The man fascinated me horribly for some reason. Why
in the devil's name was he up and dressed at 3 in the morning? How did he know anything had happened unusual in my room? Then his whisper began again. It is your amazing vitality which causes you this annoyance, he said, shifting his eyes back to mine. I gasped. Something in his voice or manner turned my blood into ice. That's the real attraction, he went on. But if this continues, one of us will have to leave, you know. I positively could not find a word to say in reply. The channels of speech dried up within me. I simply stared and wondered what he would say next. I watched him in a sort of dream, and as far as I can remember, he asked me to promise to call him sooner another time, and then began to walk around the room, uttering strange sounds and making signs with his arms and hands until he reached the door. Then he was gone in a second, and I had closed and locked the door behind him. After this, the Smith adventure drew rapidly to a climax. It was a week or two later, and I was coming home between 2 and 3 in the morning from a maternity case, certain features of which for the time being had very much taken possession of my mind, so much so, indeed, that I passed Smith's door without giving him a single thought. You guys are awesome. I do need to pause the live here for real quick, and I will be right back. Okay.
All right, we're back. My apologies for that. I'm so glad you guys are enjoying it. I am really enjoying this story a lot more. Eljon Blackwood is just... The guy's a freaking genius. I mean, let's just be honest. The man's a genius. And it appears to have closed itself. Well, that's just hunky-dory. Love when that happens. Yeah, these old gothic horror stories are just so good. So good. Okay, so we're just going to pick up from here. And if we have time, we might discuss something that I think you guys might be interested in. But we shall see. After this, the Smith adventure drew rapidly to a climax. It was a week or two later, and I was coming home between 2 and 3 in the morning from a maternity case, certain features of which for the time being had very much taken possession of my mind, so much so, indeed, that I passed Smith's door without giving him a single thought. The gas jet on the landing was still burning, but so low that it made little impression on the waves of deep shadow that lay across the stairs. Overhead, the faintest possible gleam of gray showed that the morning was not far away. A few stars shone down through the skylight. The house was still as the grave, and the only sound to break the silence was the rushing of the wind round the walls and over the roof. But this was a fitful sound, suddenly rising and as suddenly falling away again, and it only served to intensify the silence. I had already reached my own landing when I gave a violent start. It was automatic, almost a reflex action, in fact, for it was only when I caught myself fumbling at the door handle and thinking where I could conceal myself quickest that I realized a voice had sounded close beside me in the air. It was the same voice I had heard before, and it seemed to me to be calling for help. And yet the very same minute I pushed into the room, determined to disregard it, and seeking to persuade myself it was the creaking of the boards under my weight or the rushing noise of the wind that had deceived me. But hardly had I reached the table where the candles stood when the sound was unmistakably repeated. "Help! Help!" And this time it was accompanied by what I can only describe as a vivid, tactile hallucination. I was touched. The skin of my arm was clutched by fingers. Some compelling force sent me headlong downstairs as if the haunting forces of the whole world were at my heels. At Smith's door I paused. The force of his previous warning injunction to seek his aid without delay acted suddenly, and I leant my whole weight against the panels, little dreaming that I should be called upon to give help rather than to receive it. The door yielded at once, and I burst into a room that was so full of choking vapor, moving in slow clouds, that at first I could distinguish nothing at all but a set of what seemed to be huge shadows passing in and out of the mist. Then, gradually, I perceived that a red lamp on the mantelpiece gave all the light there was, and that the room which I now entered for the first time was almost empty of furniture.
The carpet was rolled back and piled in a heap in the corner, and upon the white boards of the floor I noticed a large circle drawn in black of some material that emitted a faint, glowing light, and was apparently smoking. Inside this circle, as well as at the regular intervals outside it, were curious-looking designs also traced in the same black, smoking substance. These, too, seemed to emit a feeble light of their own. My first impression on entering the room had been that it was full of people, I was going to say, but that hardly expresses my meaning. Beings, they certainly were, but it was borne in upon me beyond the possibility of doubt that they were not human beings. That I had caught a momentary glimpse of living, intelligent entities I can never doubt, but I am equally convinced, though I cannot prove it, that these entities were from some other scheme of evolution altogether, and had nothing to do with the ordinary human life, either incarnate or discarnate. But, whatever they were, the visible appearance of them was exceedingly fleeting. I no longer saw anything, though I still felt convinced of their immediate presence. They were, moreover, of the same order of life as a visitant in my bedroom a few nights before, and their proximity to my atmosphere in numbers instead of singly as before conveyed to my mind something that is quite terrible and overwhelming. I fell into a violent trembling, and the perspiration poured from my face in streams. They were in constant motion about me. They stood close to my side, moved behind me, brushed past my shoulder, stirred the hair on my forehead, and circled round me without ever actually touching me, yet always pressing closer and closer. Especially in the air just over my head there seemed ceaseless movement, and it was accompanied by a confused noise of whispering and sighing that threatened every moment to become articulate in words. To my intense relief, however, I heard no distinct words, and the noise continued more like the rising and falling of the wind than anything else I can imagine. But the characteristic of these beings that impressed me most strongly at the time, and of which I have carried away the most permanent recollection, was that each one of them possessed what seemed to be a vibrating center which impelled it with tremendous force and caused a rapid whirling motion of the atmosphere as it passed me. The air was full of these little vortices of whirring, rotating force, and whenever one of them pressed me too closely, I felt as if the nerves in that particular portion of my body had been literally drawn out, absolutely depleted of vitality, and then immediately replaced. But replaced dead, flabby, useless. Then, suddenly, for the first time, my eyes fell upon Smith. He was crouching against the wall on my right, in an attitude that was obviously defensive, and it was plain he was in extremities. The terror on his face was pitiable, but at the same time there was another expression about the tightly clenched teeth and mouth which showed that he had not lost all control of himself. He wore the most resolute expression I have ever seen on a human countenance, and, though for the moment at a fearful disadvantage, he looked like a man who had confidence in himself, and in spite of the working fear, was waiting his opportunity. For my part, I was face to face with a situation so utterly beyond my knowledge and comprehension that I felt as helpless as a child and as useless. Help me back quick into that circle, I heard him half cry, half whisper to me across the moving vapors. My only value appears to have been that I was not afraid to act. Knowing nothing of the forces I was dealing with, I had no idea of the deadly perils risked. I sprang forward and caught him by the arms. He threw all his weight in my direction, and by our combined efforts, his body left the wall and lurched across the floor towards the circle. Instantly, there descended upon us out of the empty air of that smoke-laden room a force which I can only compare to the pushing, driving power of a great wind pent up within a narrow space. It was almost explosive in its effect, and it seemed to operate upon all parts of my body equally. It fell upon us with a rushing noise that filled my ears and made me think for a moment the very walls and roof of the building had been torn asunder. Under its first blow, we staggered back against the wall, and I understood plainly that its purpose was to prevent us getting back into the circle in the middle of the floor. Pouring with perspiration and breathless, with every muscle strained to the very utmost, we at length managed to get to the edge of the circle, and at this moment so great was the opposing force that I felt myself actually torn from Smith's arms, lifted from my feet, and twirled round in the direction of the windows as if the wheel of some great machine had caught my clothes and was tearing me to destruction in its revolution. But even as I fell, bruised and breathless against the wall, I saw Smith firmly upon his feet in the circle and slowly rising again to an upright position. My eyes never left his figure once in the next few minutes. He drew himself up to his full height. His great shoulders squared themselves. His head was thrown back a little, and as I looked, I saw the expression on his face change swiftly from fear to one of absolute command. He looked steadily round the room, and then his voice began to vibrate. At first, in a low tone, it gradually rose till it assumed the same volume and intensity I had heard that night when he called up the stairs into my room. It was a curiously increasing sound, more like the swelling of an instrument than a human voice. And as it grew in power and filled the room, I became aware that a great change was being effected slowly and surely. The confusion of noise and rushings of air fell into the roll of long, steady vibrations, not unlike those caused by the deeper pedals of an organ. The movements in the air became less violent, then grew decidedly weaker, and finally ceased altogether. The whisperings and sighings became fainter and fainter, till at last I could not hear them at all. And strangest of all, the light emitted by the circle as well as by the designs round it increased to a steady glow, casting their radiance upwards with the weirdest possible effect upon his features. Slowly, by the power of his voice, behind which lay undoubtedly a genuine knowledge of the occult manipulation of sound, this man dominated the forces that had escaped from their proper sphere, until at length the room was reduced to silence and perfect order again. Judging by the immense relief which also communicated itself to my nerves, I then felt that the crisis was over, and Smith was wholly master of the situation. But hardly I had begun to congratulate myself upon this result, and to gather my scattered senses about me, when, uttering a loud cry, I saw him leap out of the circle and fling himself into the air, as it seemed to me, into the empty air. Then, even while holding my breath for dread of the crash he was bound to come upon the floor. I saw him strike with a dull thud against a solid body in mid-air, and the next instant he was wrestling with some ponderous thing that was absolutely invisible to me, and the room shook with the struggle. The to and fro they swayed, sometimes lurching in one direction, sometimes in another, and always in horrible proximity to myself as I leaned trembling against the wall and watched the encounter. It lasted at most but a short minute or two, ending as suddenly as it had began. Smith, with an unexpected movement, threw up his arms with a cry of relief. At the same instant, there was a wild, tearing shriek in the air beside me, and something rushed past us with a noise like the passage of a flock of big birds. Both windows rattled as if they would break away from their sashes. Then a sense of emptiness and peace suddenly came over the room, and I knew that all was over. Smith, his face exceedingly white, but otherwise strangely composed, turned to me at once. "God, if you hadn't come, you deflected the stream, broke it up," he whispered. "You saved me." The doctor made a long pause. Presently he felt for his pipe in the darkness, groping over the table behind us with both hands. No one spoke for a bit, but all dreaded the sudden glare that would come when he struck the match. The fire was nearly out, and the great hall was pitch dark. The storyteller did not strike that match. He was merely gaining time for some hidden reason of his own. And presently he went on with his tale in a more subdued voice. "I quite forget," he said, "how I got back to my room on my own. How I got back to my own room. I only know that I lay with 2 lighted candles for the rest of the night. The first thing I did in the morning was to let the landlady know I was leaving her house at the end of the week. Smith still has my rabbinical treatise. At least he did not return it to me at that time, and I have never seen him since to ask for it." I freaking love Blackwood. So good. So good. Oh, I mean, I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, because that stuff is just, his work is so good. So good. And it is so, like, I love reading it out loud because it is so just, it's so, the only word I can think of is meaty. It's like, when you talk about like an actor chewing the scenery, like, that's what this is. This is meaty. It's so meaty. I get to chew on it and really, it's like Monday night if you were here when I read The Telltale Heart. It's the same thing I get with Poe. It's his work is so just thick and meaty that I can just sit there and chew on it and go as crazy and nutball as I want to, and no one even thinks it, right? So what would you guys think? And I'm just kind of spitballing ideas here because I really, my brain is constantly going, especially when it comes to different ideas I have for this thing. Oh, well, let me ask, which one did you guys like best? Did you like the first story or the second story? I'm actually really curious because Sir Walter Scott is a new one for us. Should play the Jeopardy music. What do you all think? Give me your thoughts. Second, I'm kind of leaning that way myself. The first one. Okay, all right. Second, okay. The last story. 2. All right. Wings. I totally agree with you. Algernon Blackwood is one that's just, the man was really, you can see why H.P. Lovecraft and Stephen King and Richard Matheson all point to Algernon Blackwood as a heavy influence on their work. H.P. Lovecraft was very vocal about being a fan of Blackwood's work. So, I mean, you can definitely see that. The second one could have been an entire book. Yeah, So, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed them both. I mean, it's, the second one being, I agree, the second one is probably the more fun for me anyway. Lorna, I absolutely agree with you. I think there is a place for both. I think that, especially if you look at it as the idea of, and we've done these before, like a while, I should do another one again, like this whole lineage of horror writers. They go back and you can sort of trace that lineage from like Sir Walter Scott to, Mary Shelley to Algernon Blackwood and Ambrose Bierce and, all of the other different authors that we've featured, and take that lineage all the way up through Lovecraft and Matheson and Robert Bloch and all the way up to Stephen King and some of the newer writers that are out there, which I'd love to read some of them, but I have to find some that are appropriate, because a lot of the stuff that I've been reading lately independently on my own, authors like Nick Cutter and Anya Alborn, Nat Cassidy, who is just a nutcase. I love the man, but he's a nutcase. They're all amazing, and I would recommend them unless you are squeamish, because they do not hold back. They go all in. But they're all very good. T. King Fisher is another one that's really good that you can actually get into, that's not super gory or anything. But anyway, so what I was curious is if you guys, so I was kind of looking at doing some additional things, not necessarily things to make money per se, but different avenues of storytelling. One of which was taking some of these, like tonight, asking you guys which one of these 2 stories do you guys like the best, and taking that one and turning it into an actual produced audiobook, and either putting it up on Audible, but also making it available on my Tubes of You channel, where you guys could listen to the whole thing. I would put it up on Audible and let it be one of those ones that, can be available with an Audible subscription, things like that. And I want to put it under maybe this is corny, but I want to put it under the umbrella of Storytime with UndeadPapa Presents. I just think that would be fun, to say, okay, this is because really Storytime with UndeadPapa has become more than just me as a storyteller. It's become, for lack of a better word, a brand. And I want to grow that and put it in a place where it's accessible for people. So having something like Storytime with UndeadPapa Presents and having it be an audiobook or a collection of audios of, like, say, Algernon Blackwood, I think would be really fun, but also could grow into something where I have an actual like make an actual physical book. That's, say, Storytime with UndeadPapa presents Algernon Blackwood, and have the stories in the book, but also tie it to an audiobook, but also have little snippets in the book about, the night that we read it. And, like tonight I would talk about this book and how we read it, and the other story that was read, and everybody's response to it, things like that. Just something fun. There would be some cost associated with like a physical book, or an ebook, but I think that would be something that would be fun, and I would definitely not make it something that would be very expensive, because the stories are the point. And that's really, I've said that before, but the stories are what matter to me, and being able to share them with you guys, because sharing stories is a human activity as old as humans themselves, Anyway, I know I talk a lot about that stuff, but it's just something that it's part of what makes it fun for me. But also part of what makes this fun for me is being able to share it with you guys. I could, but I might, and this is coming from a realistic amount of work I would want to put in standpoint. I would love to work with other artists, to create illustrations for the books, things like that, like my buddy David Ketcherside, who did the cover illustration for our Wizard of Oz series, the Wizard of Oz week, which would be great. And so, being able to illustrate it myself, it would be wonderful as well. My UndeadPapa head logo is one that I drew and then ran it through Photoshop to add color and stuff like that. But from the line work, which is really fun. So, well, it is now 11:15 on the East Coast, and we're ending out the night at 15 superfans, which is amazing. You guys are amazingly generous, and it means a lot to me. It means a lot to have the support and to be surrounded by a community that gives a crap, not just about me, but about each other. I know I say that a lot, but it is the truth, and I mean it sincerely. So, thank you guys for hanging out with me a little bit around the fire with me tonight. We'll be back on Friday for some more tales of the strange and the fantastic. I haven't picked out the stories yet, but I will be doing that probably tonight before I go to bed. And on Sunday, we'll be starting The House at Pooh Corner, which is the second book in A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh series, which, I can't wait to do that one because I get to do the voices again. So, makes me funny. Makes me happy. So, as we've discussed, if you guys enjoy the stories and would like to help support what I do here, please consider becoming a superfan. Like 5 of you literally did today, which is amazing, and being generous with each other. I appreciate you. You can also go out to the UndeadPapa Mercantile, which is actually linked in my bio. And there are t-shirts and stickers, and a new t-shirt, actually 2 new designs, should be coming before the end of next month. I'll let you know as soon as they launch. Until Friday, please be kind to each other. And be kind to yourself, because kindness matters. And so do you. Good night, everybody. And good night over there on the tubes. I greatly appreciate the fact that you hung out with us tonight. And just between you and me, there might be some YouTube exclusive stuff coming up soon. So, stay tuned.